will continue to support the bill. Kia ora tātou.
Stephen Browning.
Mr Speaker, the Green Party unfortunately is opposing the Biosecurity Law Reform Bill. This bill doesn't go near far enough, and even if it did, this bill would not be resourced well enough and isn't being resourced well enough, but we would need some significant changes that haven't come through the Select Committee process at all. There are parts of the bill that we can see could have benefits. Extending our reach to the EEZ is consistent with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea and would ratify the international conventions for ship ballast water, and there's some immediate benefits there. Establishing a national policy direction would make the Crown be bound to regional pest plans, and we may speak to that a bit more because that is flawed as well. But the theory behind it is all good. Distributed responsibility for biosecurity management. Biosecurity management would be less centralised, with new duties placed on the importers to proactively manage the risks. But that leaves a huge hole as well, Mr Speaker, and particularly when our inspections are under-resourced. Industry groups can become management agencies with significant powers to make decisions and raise levies. And there is a benefit here. The new agencies would be subject to the Official Information Act, and we may actually get some real inside stuff on whether they are working or not. But I would suspect that some of the sectors will be reluctant to be open to that level of scrutiny and may be reluctant to join into some of those agreements that the government's trying to put onto them. The new Biosecurity Information Database will mean that personal land and biosecurity data will be collected and shared, enabling better risk management in the future. So there are some positive things. However, there are a number of other parts of the bill that are very concerning to us, and we cannot support the bill. Targeted risk management seems like a good idea at first glance. And yes, we do need to target our limited resources in the best way. Recognising the huge size of the biosecurity task, this bill attempts to prioritise scarce resources. And they're becoming scarcer all the time as this government keeps shrinking back on biosecurity. But all of the government's current activity leads to these resources being targeted at the cash cows of the economy while ignoring other vulnerable industries. The big economic cash cows of the moment, Mr Speaker, they may not be the big cash cows in the future, and the shortcomings in this bill and the huge shortcomings in resourcing of biosecurity by this government stand to leave a legacy for ongoing generations. And we can think of the pests that have come in recent years that are here and that are not going away, that future generations have to factor in for their management in primary industries. And I can point out a few. In the marine area, Undaria cost the marine aquaculture industry significantly, and they hooked into it and did something about it. But Undaria is here to stay, and it's spreading as we speak. Yep, we may take an opportunity out of that and grow Undaria for some markets, probably markets in countries where it came, but at the same time it is a massive cost. Pacific oyster, the way that was spread around, supported by a previous Minister of Fisheries, Sir Doug Kidd, who helped with that one. The South African brown mussel that the ships brought into Tasman Bay, some of the sea squirts, and there are more by the year in our marine environment. Kiwi fruit, well, we know about kiwi fruit and the PSA. The pollen imports that came in so recklessly and allowed by this government. The kiwi fruit industry, of course, is subject at huge risk by fruit fly and other potential pests as well. The import health standard that was just mentioned by, from Labor just before, with capsicum, eggplant, tomatoes, cucumbers, all of those things, the risk of fruit fly getting into that industry and a number of other of the fruit industries is immense. To be actually allowing the possibility and accepting a certain number of eggs coming in as a measure, as a baseline for biosecurity is appalling. We've already got the psyllid that's come in and has thrashed that industry and causing huge amounts of pesticide to be used that wasn't being used before. The same with the potato industry. $250 million already down the tubes because of biosecurity shortfalls by this government. We could have used that $250 million in biosecurity to prevent other things getting in. The fruit fly, we know that if it gets into the Bay of Plenty, they anticipate 820 million loss, and with 3,500 jobs down the tubes because of it. But maybe that's already halfway down because of the slackness around the pollen and the PSA. Hawke's Bay, 390 million will be down the tubes roughly if fruit fly get in, with 3,000 jobs, and Nelson 265 million and almost 2,000 jobs anticipated as well. And then there's the honey. We anticipate, because of the free trade agreements, to be allowing honey imports from Australia with known risk, with known disease factors that we don't have in New Zealand already. That means a lot more chemical being used around our hives and a reduction in the quality of the produce that we want to send overseas. I'll just mention, by the way, with the capsicum, eggplant, tomatoes, cucumber, potatoes, things affected by the psyllid, particularly the solonums, there's a huge amount of pesticide being used. Those industries were getting better and better, particularly the glasshouse industry, at not using dangerous pesticides on our kai, on our food. But what's happened now, they were using biological controls, and they were very good managers, very efficient managers, bringing in insects that would deal with the pests that they had at the time, the other form of whitefly, aphis, mites and things, all under control using biological means. We've got the psyllid. It's costing us as a community and in health, because if we test those, if we dare to test those produce at the moment, we will always find significant chemical residues, and not just one, a multiplicity of residues in that produce, because they haven't got a solution for psyllid. We have to get on top of biosecurity better than this bill is setting up. It is setting up purely to alleviate government from some money in looking after biosecurity. It's looking after the cash cows. It's forgetting that the other industries out there, the flour industry, the pork industry and the honey industry, those other ones that the government seems to think are too small to worry about, they may be the Zesperys and the Fonterras in the future if things go wrong in those industries. Our trees, our forest industry is also at significant risk, and the huge cost to the community when we spray them when there's a gypsy moth outbreak is not acceptable. The other thing with this bill, it doesn't really deal with the risks of genetic engineering and the risks of contamination that are inevitable if we have GE getting in the wrong way in this country. There are people that do not understand the depth of the cost of that to New Zealand and brand New Zealand if we get it wrong in terms of imports and contamination through seed, whether it be canola, corn or something else that hasn't appeared here as yet. Lastly, this bill specifically makes biosecurity law subject to the limitation of international trade agreements. That is terrible. We lose our sovereignty on how we can look after biosecurity in this country for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the Green Party will not be able to support this bill.
Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It occurs to